I knew it was going to be a long weekend the second I saw that bleach-blonde Bob marching down the gravel path toward my dock like she owned the lake. Her name's Cheryl, of course. Cheryl Withers. She's the HOA vice president, which basically means she's self-appointed queen of everyone's business. And today, apparently, her business was my dock, my lakefront, and unbelievably my guests. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and I had a few buddies over for a cookout. My cousin Zariah and her daughter were visiting from out of state, and my best friend had brought his fishing gear. We were laughing, grilling, tossing a football around the yard. The kind of stuff you're supposed to do when you live by a lake. I bought this property 3 years ago, and I pay extra taxes for the private shoreline that wraps around my lot. It's legally separate from the HOA's shared access point, which is on the opposite side of the subdivision. But Cheryl, she never lets facts get in the way of her power trips. She trudged onto my dock like it was a public sidewalk, arms flailing like she was directing traffic. "You can't have this many people on the lake at once," she barked, pointing at my cousin's paddleboard and the 2 lawn chairs set up at the edge of the dock. "This isn't a resort, Nathan." I was halfway through flipping some burgers when I heard her. I turned slowly, locked eyes with her, and said, "Excuse me." "This is common property," she snapped, already pulling out a little leather-bound HOA handbook like it was the Constitution. "Guests are limited to 2 per household, and they must be approved in writing by the board for lake use." "Cheryl," I said, walking over calmly, "you're standing on my private dock on my deeded lakefront property. You're trespassing." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. For a second, I thought she might actually short-circuit. I pointed to the bold black sign bolted to the dock post. "Private property Nathan Halberg." She squinted at it like it had just materialized. "No, this is all part of the HOA's jurisdiction," she insisted, now flipping furiously through her little book. "We have policies, rules." I waved over Zariah, who had already started filming on her phone. "Hey Z, can you zoom in on the dock line? And maybe the survey marker?" Zariah gave me a thumbs up and caught the metal stake embedded in the ground 10 feet behind where Cheryl was standing. "Cheryl, that marker right there, that's the boundary. Everything from here to the waterline is mine, not the HOA's." "Mine?" She froze, staring at the marker like it had betrayed her. "You can't just claim the lake," she hissed. "I didn't claim anything. The county did. I bought it. I have the deed, the survey, and the tax bill to prove it." At that point, Cheryl's face had turned bright red. The kind of red that made you worry if her blood pressure was about to detonate. She turned to my cousin. "You need to leave the water immediately or I'll call security." Zariah laughed. "Please do." "I'd love to have this on record." I added, "And when you call them, make sure you let them know you trespassed onto private property and harassed my family. I've got 3 cameras recording this." Cheryl's jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might snap. She spun around and stormed off the dock, heels clicking like nails in a coffin lid. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. Not even close. By Sunday morning, I knew Cheryl wasn't going to let yesterday go. I could feel it in the air like the lake mist had thickened with petty vengeance. Sure enough, at exactly 11:30, a white SUV with a vinyl Lakewood Lakes HOA decal pulled up right outside my fence line. Out popped Gerald, the HOA's so-called compliance officer, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He held a clipboard like it was a weapon, his tie slightly askew and sweat already soaking through his collar. He didn't even make it through the gate before I met him at the edge of the yard. "Let me guess," I said, arms crossed. "Cheryl sent you." Gerald gave me a tight-lipped nod and cleared his throat. "We received a formal complaint about unauthorized use of communal lakefront access and improper guest volume." I leaned against the post and gestured toward the water. "You can see the survey stake right there. Everything east of it is private land. She walked onto it without permission yesterday." Gerald raised an eyebrow. "You have a copy of the property line documentation?" "Inside." "You want to see the original deed or the updated county survey?" He hesitated, then checked a box on his clipboard. I'll need to take photos for record keeping. Go ahead, I said. But I'd recommend you avoid stepping past the stake unless you want to be part of another trespassing report. Gerald's mouth twitched slightly, not a smile, more like someone suppressing a sneeze in church. He backed up, snapped a few photos from the sidewalk, and left without another word. By the time dinner rolled around, I thought maybe that was it. But around dusk, Zariah and I noticed something odd. A small aluminum sign had been bolted to a tree just outside my property line, facing the lake. It read, "HOA access area, resident guests must register, no private use." Zariah squinted at it. That wasn't there this morning. I walked over, flashlight in hand, and noticed the bolts were brand new, shiny silver, barely weathered. And below the sign, faint tire tracks curved off the HOA-maintained path and onto the grassy slope near my dock. Someone had driven in, probably at night, and installed it without notifying anyone. "Trying to rebrand my shoreline now?" I muttered. That's when Zariah pointed at the base of the tree. Wedged under a root was a folded, weatherproof envelope. Inside, a single-page notice, printed with the HOA letterhead, declaring that my lot, specifically the dock area, was under review for jurisdictional reassignment based on current board interpretation of shared environmental resources. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. "The hell is jurisdictional reassignment?" Zariah asked. "Something made up," I said. "They're trying to retroactively claim my land." The next morning, I drove down to the county land office before they even opened. I waited 20 minutes for a staffer named Renata, who I'd worked with during the original property purchase, to arrive. As soon as she saw the document, she rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might topple backward. "They can't reassign jurisdiction over deeded land," she said, flipping through my parcel file. "That's not a thing. There's no legal mechanism for that. You own from the marker to the waterline." I asked if the HOA had filed anything formal with the county. "They tried," she said, pulling up a scanned document. "This was submitted Friday afternoon. It's a request to redefine lot boundaries for environmental oversight, but it was immediately rejected. There's no legal basis." "Can I get a certified copy of that rejection?" I asked. She printed it, signed it in front of me, and embossed it with the county seal. By the time I got home, it was clear Cheryl had escalated. A new email had landed in my inbox from the HOA board, stating that my property was now temporarily restricted from guest use pending board review. They cited environmental impact concerns and claimed that 5 separate households had complained about noise and excessive human activity. I knew exactly what they were doing, creating a paper trail of fabricated complaints so they could justify harsher penalties down the line. I wasn't about to let that stand. That afternoon, I installed 2 more security cameras, one facing the lakefront, one aimed at the side path Cheryl had used. I also called my friend Mira, a municipal attorney who owed me a favor from a past zoning issue. "They're trying to fabricate a regulatory process that doesn't exist," she said after reviewing the documents. "That's fraud. If they've falsified complaints or used HOA funds to post signage without board approval, that's misappropriation." "Can we escalate?" Mira paused. "If you give me a copy of their budget, board meeting minutes, and the email thread, I can take it to the county prosecutor's office. They've prosecuted HOAs before for misuse of funds and overreach." I had everything she needed by that evening. Thanks to an open records request I'd filed months ago, I had access to the past year of board minutes. That's when I spotted it, line item 18 from the April meeting. Authorization to post updated signage at communal lakefront access points. Only 2 locations were listed. Mine wasn't one of them. The next board meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. I decided I'd attend. When I walked into the community center, Cheryl was already seated at the long, folding table up front, flanked by 3 other board members, none of whom looked thrilled to be there. The room had maybe 20 residents, mostly older folks who kept their heads down unless their lawn got mentioned. I waited until the public comment period. "My name is Nathan Halberg," I said, stepping up to the mic. "And I'm here to address a very serious abuse of authority by this board." Cheryl immediately tried to interrupt, but the chairperson, a wiry man named Dennis, held up his hand. "Let him speak." I unfolded the rejection letter from the county and read it aloud. Then I held up the forged restriction notice and pointed toward Cheryl. "This was placed on my property without consent. It cites a board action that never occurred. The sign was installed using HOA funds for a location not approved in your own minutes. That's misappropriation." And the fake complaints. I checked with the supposed households. 3 of them had no idea their names had been used. Dennis's expression turned leaden. "I've also filed a formal complaint with the county prosecutor's office," I continued, "including copies of all relevant documentation. At this point, this isn't just about overreach, it's about fraud." Cheryl's voice cracked as she leaned toward the mic. "This is a misunderstanding. We were protecting community resources." Dennis cut her off. "Did you authorize the sign, Cheryl?" She blinked. I interpreted the April vote. "No," he said. "Did you authorize the use of funds for a location not listed?" Silence. One of the other board members leaned in and whispered something to Dennis. Then he turned to the rest of the room. "We'll be scheduling an emergency audit of all board-authorized spending. Effective immediately, any further action regarding lakefront access is suspended." I didn't say another word. I just left the paperwork on the table and walked out. Mira called me the next day. The county prosecutor's office had taken interest. Apparently, Cheryl had submitted multiple fabricated complaints under fake names, one of which belonged to a woman who'd moved out of the neighborhood 2 years ago. They were opening an investigation. By the following Tuesday, Cheryl's paper empire had started crumbling, but she wasn't going down quietly. Word of the forged complaints and unauthorized spending had made the rounds faster than gossip at a church bake sale, and now the neighborhood was tense. Some residents were angry at the board. Others were confused, but a surprising number were just plain curious, like it had finally occurred to them to wonder what exactly the board had been doing behind closed doors all these years. I kept my head down, didn't respond to the whispers. Didn't engage when nosy neighbors wandered too close to my yard, just out for a walk. I figured Cheryl would either resign or get removed quietly. But then Thursday happened. I was out back installing a motion sensor light when I heard tires crunching on the gravel path near the lake. I paused and looked through the trees. A black pickup truck, not Gerald's usual SUV, was idling just beyond the HOA's maintenance shed. 2 men in navy jackets stepped out. I didn't recognize them, but their posture was all business. One of them walked toward the dock with a clipboard. The other had a badge clipped to his belt. I walked down to meet them halfway. "You Nathan Halberg?" the one with the badge asked. "Yeah," he nodded toward the dock. "Mind walking us through your property line?" "We're investigating a possible incident involving unauthorized surveillance and tampering with private property." My stomach dropped, but not from guilt. "Surveillance?" I asked. The second man flipped open a folder. "We received a report that your rear-facing cameras were recording members of the HOA during compliance inspections without their consent. There's also an allegation that your security system was used to block access to communal land." I stared at him. "That's not possible. The cameras are static." "They don't block anything, and they're mounted entirely on my property." "Can we see the footage?" asked the one with the badge. I led them inside, pulled up the footage archive from the past 10 days, and let it roll. They watched in silence as Cheryl walked onto the dock, argued with me, and left. Then Gerald appeared the next day, stayed on the public side of the line, and left without issue. The second man narrowed his eyes. "What's this here?" he asked, pointing to a timestamp from 2 nights ago. The screen showed a figure walking near the tree line after dark. The person wore a hoodie and carried a small object in one hand. They paused at the newly installed sign, the one falsely claiming HOA jurisdiction, then walked out of frame. I hadn't seen that yet, I admitted. I'll zoom in. The resolution wasn't great in the dark, but the flashlight beam the person briefly used to check the bolts lit up their face for just a second. It was Cheryl. The officer leaned back. That's what we needed. We had suspicions she was behind the installations, but without proof. This helps a lot. What exactly is she being investigated for? I asked. The second man hesitated. In addition to misappropriation of HOA funds and submitting falsified documents to the county, there's evidence she accessed the HOA's internal complaint system to create fraudulent household identities. That enters felony territory: wire fraud, potentially identity theft. And the surveillance thing? Fabricated, the first man said. She filed the report herself using an alias, claimed you were monitoring residents' private activities from inside their homes. We already traced the IP address of the initial complaint. It came from her HOA-issued laptop. I let out a long breath and leaned against the counter. She's unraveling, I said. She's being reckless, the officer replied. And that makes her dangerous. They left with a copy of the footage and promised to keep me updated. That night, I forwarded everything to Mira. Her response was immediate. She wanted me to attend the next county council meeting, where the prosecutor's office was planning to present the case for formal charges. The meeting was held in a municipal building across town. I sat in the third row, behind a line of stern-looking officials and two plainclothes officers. Cheryl was nowhere to be seen. Her attorney, a man with a permanent scowl and a shiny forehead, sat alone at the defense table. When the prosecutor stood to speak, she didn't hold back. In the course of a 2-week investigation, she began, we uncovered a pattern of deliberate deception and abuse of authority by Mrs. Cheryl Withers, acting in her capacity as vice president of the Lakewood Lakes Homeowners Association. This includes the misuse of HOA funds for personal vendettas, the forging of resident complaints using both defunct and fictitious identities, and the installation of fraudulent signage on private property in an attempt to unlawfully expand HOA jurisdiction. She turned and pointed to the screen behind her. A still frame of Cheryl's face, illuminated by flashlight, filled the display. This image was captured by a security system operated legally on deeded land. The defendant claimed this very system was used to violate resident privacy. That claim was false, and the report was submitted using a fabricated name. We have traced the submission to her personal device. The room murmured. The defense attorney stood, face stiff. We dispute the interpretation of these events. My client acted with the board's best interest in mind. A council member leaned forward. Is there evidence the board authorized the spending or the signage? No, the prosecutor replied. In fact, 2 board members submitted sworn statements denying any knowledge of the installations or the reallocation of HOA funds. The council voted unanimously to refer the case to the county district court. Cheryl was formally charged with 3 felonies and 2 misdemeanors, including misappropriation of funds, filing false reports, identity fraud, and trespassing. When I stepped outside into the cool evening air, it felt like a weight had lifted. Not just for me, but for every resident who'd been quietly worn down by years of her authoritarian nonsense. The following day, Dennis, the HOA chair, called a special meeting in the community center. This time, it was packed. People I hadn't seen in months showed up, some clutching HOA mailers, others just there to finally be heard. Dennis stood at the podium, looking tired but determined. Effective immediately, Cheryl Withers is suspended from all duties pending the outcome of the investigation. We will begin a full audit of the HOA's finances and voting procedures, and in light of what's happened, we're proposing a series of reforms. He gestured to a whiteboard behind him where a list had been scrawled in blue marker. Among the items, mandatory transparency in board spending, public access to meeting records, and term limits for board members. One woman stood up from the back row. Why did it take this long for someone to say something? I stood too, because a lot of us didn't know how deep it went. We assumed it was just overreach, not criminal behavior. But now that we know, we fix it. Another neighbor, a retired firefighter, nodded. We need a committee, independent from the board. A watchdog. Dennis looked around the room. Then let's form one tonight. Volunteers? 10 hands went up. Mine included. Over the next few hours, we drafted a proposal for a community oversight panel with rotating members, public voting, and a direct line to the county liaison. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As I left the meeting, Zariah called from the airport to check in. "You good?" she asked. "Or is Cheryl still haunting your shoreline?" "She's out of power," I said, watching the moonlight ripple across the lake. "And soon she'll be out of the neighborhood." There was a long pause, then she laughed. "Told you that dock was worth fighting for." I looked out at the water, the same water Cheryl had tried so hard to control, and knew she'd never set foot on it again. And neither would anyone like her. The morning of Cheryl's arraignment, I stood just outside the county courthouse with a cup of coffee and a folder under my arm. The courthouse square buzzed with a quiet sort of anticipation. Reporters, residents, even a few HOA members who hadn't shown their faces since the scandal broke. A light drizzle fell, but no one left. We all wanted to see where this would land. Inside, the judge listened patiently as the prosecutor laid out the charges. It wasn't just fraud and trespassing anymore. New evidence had unearthed something worse. Apparently, while reviewing the HOA's financial records during the audit, the county discovered that Cheryl had funneled over $15,000 from the HOA reserve fund into a dummy lake preservation account. That account had been used to pay a private contractor, someone she'd known personally, to install surveillance equipment on 3 other residents' properties without their knowledge. All of it under the guise of environmental compliance monitoring. That crossed the line from unethical to criminal surveillance. The contractor, fearing liability, flipped immediately and provided invoices, emails, and bank transfers. The judge didn't even blink before revoking Cheryl's bail. She was remanded into custody pending trial. I didn't stay for the rest of the hearing. I had other things to do. Back at Lakewood Lakes, the community had shifted. The HOA board, now operating under interim leadership, had called for a full election in 30 days. Every position would be up for grabs. For the first time in years, people actually wanted to be involved. Zariah had flown home, but her footage of Cheryl's dock invasion had gone viral on a local watchdog forum. It wasn't just about one house anymore. Other neighborhoods started sharing similar stories, boards inventing rules, harassing homeowners, overstepping legal boundaries. A city councilman even reached out to me for a copy of the footage and documentation. He was drafting a bill to create stricter oversight on HOA governance. But for me, the real turning point came 2 nights later. I was sitting on my back porch, the lake calm and silver under a clear sky, when Dennis knocked on the gate. He didn't come empty-handed. In his hands were 3 folders, a sealed envelope, and a small cardboard box. "I thought you should see this," he said. Inside the box were dozens of printed complaints, all filed through the HOA's internal system over the past year. Most were signed with real names. A few were anonymous, but nearly half had been altered, words changed, details added, dates manipulated. Each one had Cheryl's login credentials attached. "She edited them," I said, flipping through the pages. "Or wrote them from scratch and slapped real names on them," Dennis replied. "We're sending everything to the DA's office, but we wanted you to have the originals for your records. You were named in 6 of them, not by the original authors." I opened the envelope. It was a formal letter from the HOA board, signed by every remaining member. It read in part, "We acknowledge that your rights as a homeowner were violated and that the actions taken against you were not only unauthorized but illegal. We are sorry. We are taking steps to ensure this never happens again." Dennis looked tired. Not defeated, just worn down from trying to hold together something that had been rotting from the inside. We never questioned her, he said. We let her drive everything because she was loud and organized. We thought she was keeping things in order. She was keeping people in fear, I said. He nodded. We want you to consider running for a board seat. I laughed once sharp and automatic. You're serious? You're the only one who stood up. Everyone else just tried to wait her out. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. The next few weeks rolled forward like a current smoothing out after a storm. The contractors Cheryl had hired were blacklisted from future HOA work. The county issued a cease and desist to the HOA's surveillance program, and the state attorney general's office opened a broader probe into unlicensed monitoring activities conducted by neighborhood associations statewide. The HOA election came and went. I didn't run for a full board seat, but I agreed to chair the newly formed oversight committee. We had 5 members each from different parts of the neighborhood. Our job was to review every policy, every complaint, every expenditure, and publish all findings publicly. At our first meeting, held in the open-air pavilion near the community pool, nearly 80 residents showed up. We handed out printed copies of the bylaws, highlighted sections that had been misused, and opened the floor to questions. A woman named Letitia, who lived 2 streets over, raised her hand. "How do we know this won't happen again?" she asked. I stood up and held up a laminated poster we'd had printed. It showed the new policy. All HOA board meetings must be recorded and made public within 48 hours. "We don't trust silence anymore," I said. "We trust transparency." The applause wasn't wild, it was steady, sincere. A few days later, I walked down to the dock. The fake sign had been removed. In its place, I posted something new, a wooden plaque carved by one of my neighbors that read, "Private property. Public integrity. Lakewood Lakes belongs to its people." The lake was quiet again, not the kind of quiet that comes from fear or control. The kind that comes from peace. Cheryl pled guilty to 3 charges. She took a plea deal that included restitution, a 10-year ban from serving on any HOA board, and a year of house arrest. She moved out of the neighborhood before the sentencing. Her house sold faster than anyone expected. The new owners brought cookies to the first community meeting and handed out their phone numbers. No demands, no threats, just neighbors. And as for me, I still host cookouts, still invite friends to the lake, still sit on the dock when the sun goes down and the water turns to glass. But now, when I do, I know the land beneath me isn't just protected by a deed or a sign. It's protected by accountability, by truth, and by a community that finally found its voice. And this time, it's not going quiet again.